Can you hear me now, Ian?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the third and last of our 3 evenings in this series of Thinking Aloud, entitled Our Island in Common, a North-South Conversation. And wherever you're joining from, we're delighted to have you with us. My name is Helen McHugh, and I'm a member of the planning group in Belfast South Methodist. As I'm sure most of you know by now, we're hosting this series along with Dún Laoghaire Methodist, the first time we've done such a venture. And we are very appreciative of the enthusiasm and insights of all our newly made friends in Dún Laoghaire. Our topic tonight is hopes and fears for reconciliation in Ireland. And it will be introduced by Mary Cross, who's a member of Dún Laoghaire Methodist. I think you received quite a long introduction to Mary in the information that was sent out. But suffice to say that she is a former Irish diplomat and currently a board member of the Institute of International and European Affairs. So thank you, Mary, in anticipation for sharing your insights and prompting our thinking this evening. Doctors Fergus O'Farrell and Johnson McMaster are here as well to share their thoughts with us. And our format will be the same as usual. After Mary has spoken, we will break into rooms for some smaller group discussion, coming together again for a plenary at the end. So Mary, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen. And greetings to all the colleagues and friends this evening. I have so much enjoyed this series with our 2 previous sessions and speakers, and it is a great privilege and a pleasure to talk to you this evening. I'm really, I was very taken aback at the lengthy CV that came out, because I think I gave Richard and Ian a two-phrase CV, and I think Mr. Google provided a very lengthy and extensive CV, and I really did realize then there's nowhere to hide when in this modern day and age. But I'm afraid it's a case of the exalted will be humbled, and I'm afraid, rather than the other way around, which I would prefer it. But thank you again for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation, which I think is hugely important. It's always important, but nowadays, I think it is doubly important that we focus on relations between North and South. I'm approaching it, I have to admit, as somebody who has no specific insight into the North in the same way as many of you here this evening, or indeed many of my other colleagues in the Department of Foreign Affairs would have had over the years, who worked extensively and for many years on the North-South relationship and on the North. But I have worked in a career of over 3 decades in countries that were divided, countries that became unified, that came together and were united and then split up, others that had deep and serious conflicts, and some who were invaded and split up. So I was hoping that it might be of interest to hear about the situations and perhaps draw some experience from those countries when we look at the situation here in our own island. Just as a quick background, as if you haven't enough already, I spent my early career in the United States with postings to Washington, to New York first, and then to Washington, to the UN in Washington. But all the rest of my career between headquarters and abroad. I worked in Europe, West and East, and at the EU in Brussels, dealing with the political affairs there. So I propose to draw on some of the experiences in these countries. I have some notes here to remind me, so if you see my eyes swiveling to the left, please excuse. The first one I just wanted to mention is Belgium. It was my first posting in Europe, to the Kingdom of Belgium, as opposed to the overwhelming number of my colleagues anyway, who work in the EU. But I was firstly with the Kingdom of Belgium. Secondly, I'll talk about Germany, where we were just after reunification, then the Czech Republic, Ukraine, and then the Balkans, Bosnia and Kosovo. Just to start with Belgium, I think it's probably no secret that Belgium is a country of considerable tensions between the two communities, so-called the French and the Flemish community. The Flemish in the north and Wallonia in the south. The divisions are linguistic, economic, modern industry in Flanders and aging industry in Wallonia. It had been mainly French speaking. They've been united since 1830, but it's only in the last several decades that the major tensions became apparent, because Wallonia, the French-speaking area, which always found itself as the sort of aristocracy, looking down on what they would have seen as Flemish peasantry. Obviously, that has changed considerably, but the tensions remain very significant because, of course, Wallonia has become much less economically prosperous than Flanders. And we were living there for two years in the first posting, and we're very conscious of the tensions that were there. If we went into Flanders, we couldn't speak French, we had to speak English. Brussels masks over the tensions because it is a mixture of both communities, and there are small areas that are mixed up and Flemish and French-speaking areas. The way it has held together basically is that there is complete parity of everything. It's almost smothered with bureaucratic layers in each of the Flanders and Wallonia. Each country, each part of the country has a duplicate of everything. The political parties, there's a Flemish Democratic Party, a Wallon Democratic Party, a Flemish Socialist Party, a Wallonia's Socialist Party. If a statue goes up in Flanders, another one goes up in Wallonia. There is total parity, and it's held together in that way. And Brussels, of course, is a good, holds the country together. And one of the main cores of holding that country together also is the monarchy. The king is a central figure. He has a lot to do in formation of governments. The formation of governments, as you can imagine, is incredibly difficult with mirror images of the political parties. There was almost a year where none could be formed, but it works. While Flanders has, over a number of years, decades in fact, often indicated that they would like to be independent, there is actually no majority among the country on either side for independence. There would obviously be incredibly small units but there is a support for the country staying together, difficult as it may be. But because we're so used to hearing about Brussels and all that goes on there, you tend to overlook the fact that there is a lot of tension in the country. And as I said, linguistically, the civil servants have to speak both languages. But if there is, as here, for example, a Flemish ambassador, the number 2 always has to be a French speaker, and that works throughout the world. So parity for both, almost exaggerated parity, layers and layers of bureaucracy with representatives of both communities, and the king as the monarchy holding it together. The second country then that we were sent to in Europe was Germany, and we were sent at an extremely interesting time. We went in August 1990, and in 1989, of course, the Berlin Wall was toppled. So in October 1990, the formal reunification happened. And that was an extremely interesting time because you had West Germany with 62 million people and East Germany with 11 million people. There was no great enthusiasm among European neighbors for German reunification. In fact, Prime Minister Thatcher and President Mitterrand voiced very strong worries about a united Germany. But there was a summit in Dublin organized by Taoiseach Charles Haughey, which copper-fastened reunification. And the Germans are forever grateful that was held and that managed to go ahead. But that was not to say that everything was easy. You had a population that had been split for 40 years and had grown separate over that time because East Germany was incorporated into the Soviet bloc. Everything was a command economy, huge combinats, as they call the farms. All the industry was owned by the state. It became, of course, then part of the collapse of the Soviet Union. In fact, in Germany, East Germany, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, economically, it was in a very poor state, which of course was one of the reasons. But the main reason was that Gorbachev did not, when there were riots, did not send in Soviet troops. So there was a total collapse and the Berlin Wall fell. But it was the start of a very difficult time for Germany, and we had a front row seat there, which was interesting. The East Germans, the Ostmark, their currency, in a very good political move by Chancellor Kohl, everything was changed at parity. So people were given exactly the same in West Deutschmarks as they had available in Ostdeutschmarks. And that was a huge political signal as well. But the people had grown apart, had become different. Their views were communistic. They found it very difficult to fit into a capitalist society. All their farms were broken up and sold, all their industry was taken over. And so people who were used to working in the communist system with total predictability of income were suddenly in a capitalist society. Obviously, huge strides were made in renovating properties, but all the property was given back in East Germany to people who had originally owned it before the war. And that caused huge problems for people who had been given housing, but now their real owners were coming back. Many suicides resulted, and other things that differentiated them. They had different ways of looking at things. Their media was different, different ways of making decisions of political decision making. So it wasn't that easy, and it's still not that easy for East Germans or for West Germans. there was not a great welcome for reunification in Germany among many ordinary people. They felt that they were too different. And that, to some extent, still exists. And people accept that it's going to take a very long time for total integration. It's interesting, the regime was toppled in a sense by religious roots. East German dissidents had been meeting for quite some time in Leipzig in the church there and fomenting dissent and then giving rise to significant opposition. So the church in Leipzig is a very iconic area in terms of toppling of the regime, and the groups still meet in Leipzig. It's turned into a more social occasion. So nowadays, I think it's you may have noticed that the harder left-wing parties are still get quite a lot of support in Eastern Germany, and that has made West German politics or German politics quite difficult because you have the AfD, the right-wing nationalist party, gets most of its support in Eastern Germany. And the shock still lingers of the change, particularly for older people. And that's a factor because a lot of the younger people have left. It's working its way slowly. West German still object to having to pay 7% income tax, which was introduced in 1990, and slightly less is still paid. Their bill, that was the bill for everybody for reunification. But of course, overall, it is a good thing, and polls show that nobody would want to go back. But we can't say it has not been easy, and the adaptation was huge and is still continuing. But they are coming together, even though the standard of living is still lower in East Germany. So we were 4 years there watching that incredibly interesting, including the move of capital from Berlin, from Bonn to Berlin. We were the last of the people in Bonn, and then it moved to Berlin. Of course, that has worked out. Our next post, which happened very quickly afterwards, was to the Czech Republic, which is another country with a split. Germany was reunified, but we arrived just after the Czech Republic split up with Slovakia. In 1993, Czechoslovakia was dissolved. It's a strange history of how that happened. I mean, they have been together since 1918, after the First World War. And then, of course, the communists moved in and took over in 1948. The country was split. 2/3 was Czech, a third was Slovak, and it was a federal system. There was no great push for a split, except there were two strong leaders who found it very hard to agree, and the Slovaks gradually found they were being taken over by the Czechs, and they resented that. So the two leaders got together with their parliaments and decided they would split up. There was a velvet revolution from the communist time, but there was a velvet split up. And I don't think the Czechs have ever got, or the Slovaks, enough credit for the incredibly competent way that they split everything. They split the land, they split the money, they split the army, they split the police, and they offer citizenship of either to all the people. They had to decide within 3 months whether they wanted to be Czech or Slovak, and it proceeded more or less seamlessly from there. But to undertake that kind of operation took incredible, courage, firstly. But of course, the thing was, there was no referendum among the people, and the polls showed that neither side wanted it. And President Havel, who was president of Czechoslovakia, resigned. in protest. But it nevertheless went ahead. Once it was decided by the two parliaments, it went ahead in a most incredibly efficient way. And today the two countries work well together. They had economic difficulties at the start, but now they've picked up considerably. There, all the property was restored as well to its original owners, and including the factories, the farms, etc. Again, that proceeded without the difficulties that there were in Germany. I was credited to Ukraine from the Czech Republic and had to travel there once every 3 months or so, because we didn't have enough. We do have an embassy there now, but we didn't at the time. And Ukraine declared its independence from the when the Soviet bloc broke up, declared its independence in 1991. And they're incredibly proud people, and they worked at the independence, at developing it gradually. There was not such a breakup of the farms and industries there. It was much slower. But they had a referendum for independence, and it was passed by 92%, including, which is interesting nowadays, by the Russian language-speaking minority in the east of the country. So they were having a slow recovery. I'm afraid corruption, which is a feature of many of the countries in that part of the world, still held sway, and recovery was slow, economic recovery. They were very much helped by the Western countries, but it was quite hard to get things moving because of the still existing corruption. Ireland had a big input industrially into Ukraine. They took over part of the old Aeroflot, and Cement Roadstone has a number of factories there. So we were actually the 5th largest investor, which required quite a bit of coming up and down. But then, as we're aware, in 2014, the Russians invaded and took over Crimea. Unfortunately, the Ukrainians did not treat the East Russian-speaking well. They downgraded the language, and it is a real lesson, as opposed to, say, the German generosity. Once they had the upper hand, they introduced Ukrainian as the official language, downgraded the Russian language, did not support economically the east of the country, and you had a discontented Russian minority, and the Russians took advantage of that. And I'm afraid we still have a very serious conflict in the east of the country in the Donbass region. Those are so we have a divided Ukraine, totally lost the Crimea, which I think countries now accept is gone back to Russia, and there's instability in the eastern part of the country. We've had some 14,000 people killed. So there is a country that, through mismanagement, as a way of mismanagement of its minority, lost a significant part of its territory, because it is the 2nd largest country in Europe after Russia. Those are the countries that we were posted to, and all very interesting. The last two, and I don't want to overrun too much, that I had an involvement with from Brussels, from the political side, were Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo. As you can imagine, both those were extremely difficult situations. The Political and Security Committee of the EU in Brussels has an oversight of Bosnia and the Dayton Arrangement, and the High Representative has nominated a representative there to oversee the implementation of the Dayton Accord. But when the Yugoslav Republic, when Tito died, broke up, Slovenia and Croatia declared independence, strongly supported by Germany, particularly Croatia. But then people were warning, what about Bosnia? It had 3 different communities. It had Serb, Croat, and the Muslim Albanian community called Bosniaks. And Serbia tried to take over the Republic of Srpska, which is a small part of Bosnia. And then a most horrible, horrendous war took place between 92 and 95 between Serbia, Croatia, and the Bosnians. The Bosnians, who were the majority, suffered most. They were 44%. And the atrocities, not on all sides, but to vastly superior military attacks were by the Serbs. That it went on, and I think Srebrenica and other killings, I think, are well known. Eventually, the international community, through NATO airstrikes and strikes, defeated the Serbs, and the Dayton Accord, which split the country into 3 separate areas, but with a common governing system. So there's the Republic of Srpska and the Croatian and Bosniak Federation. It's an uneasy mixture of the 3, and it's never worked very well. The tensions are huge, but it's still in place. Though in the last couple of weeks, the Republic of Serbia, which is part of Bosnia, but wants to ally with Serbia, has threatened to pull out of the agreement. So that's it's the international military try to keep the peace and keep the lid on the conflict there, but it's a very uncertain peace that has been imposed, and it doesn't work very well. Incidentally, Irish troops are part of that peacekeeping mission in Bosnia. It's an EU peacekeeping mission, and they keep if tensions arise, they move in and defuse them. Kosovo, of course, is the last one, and the war there, the same. The Serbs moved in to try to take over Kosovo, and the Albanian liberations, they're mainly Albanian, fought back, and again NATO intervened when Serbs were killing on a large scale the people of Kosovo, and the NATO airstrikes ended that, and Kosovo declared independence. It's not recognized by all countries. Indeed, 5 of the EU don't recognize Kosovo, but some 100+ other countries recognize it. Kosovo, it's mainly Muslim, and in a visit I did to one of the villages there, there is a very harrowing tradition in that village. There was a massacre there where all the boys and men between 15 and 95 were massacred. And if you look up at the side, the hillside where there are graves, they're fresh graves. There's a tradition there in that village that for all over the years, and it's almost 20 years now, they keep the soil fresh on the graves, and that is very hard, very harrowing to see. So that's an outline of the various types of peace processes: unification, deunification, splitting up, conflict, existing conflict in Kosovo. To a large extent, the tension has been reduced. The Belgians still tense with each other, but managing because of the systems that are in place. So that is that's a sort of background, perhaps, for our discussion. I'm very conscious that we have labelled it reconciliation in Northern Ireland. In my experience with reconciliation, I think it's worth mainly just finishing up with a definition that I have seen. And it's when considering reconciliation, I've just jotted this down, ultimately reconciliation to me describes the possibility that violent enemies in the past might have a future marked by partnership, civil equality and the rule of law, or even trust and friendship. And this is in contrast to a negative absence of visible violence or hostile levels of cooperation. And reconciliation, to my mind, carries a possible vision of sustainable peace as a transformative political and social relationship, and it involves a future-oriented commitment to good relations, as well as drawing a line under the conflict and violence of the past. I've seen people do that, and but more often it is very difficult. So reconciliation, as opposed to an absence of violence, is something that is worth, thinking about. And my fear is we have fears and hopes for Northern Ireland. My fear is that we're not there yet as far as real reconciliation in that definition is in Northern Ireland. That the issues that exist are deep, and the lack of understanding of the different communities makes moves forwards together in one small space quite difficult. But I think we will have a discussion on that, and it will be interesting to hear the various views. But thank you very much. I've exhausted your patience by going over the time slot, and I'll keep my peace after that and let other people have a chance. Thank you to everybody, and Helen, thank you for the introduction.